Lisa's first morning at Nexus Academy began with a sound she had never heard before. Instead of alarm bells or buzzers, gentle music filled her room as the walls slowly brightened to mimic sunrise. She sat up in bed, confused for a moment about where she was. The schedule appeared on her wall display in flowing alien script that gradually translated to English. Combat training, cultural studies, galactic history, and something called diplomatic movement. She had no idea what that last one meant. Jake was waiting for her in the hallway, looking as lost as she felt. His hair stuck up in different directions, and his uniform was wrinkled. "Did you figure out the shower?" he asked. "Sort of," Lisa replied. "The water comes out in patterns instead of just spraying. I think I accidentally activated a massage cycle." They found their way to the dining hall, following a group of Kethmoran students who moved like they were floating. The blue-skinned aliens spoke in their musical language, occasionally glancing back at the humans with curious expressions. Breakfast was another challenge. The food looked normal enough, but Lisa couldn't identify most of it. She picked items that seemed safe and hoped for the best. Jake stuck to something that looked like bread and a fruit that tasted like a cross between an apple and cinnamon. "Attention, students," announced a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Report to your assigned training areas. First-year combat students report to Training Hall Alpha." Lisa and Jake followed signs through corridors that changed, direction in ways that hurt Lisa's brain to think about. The architecture seemed designed by beings who didn't think in straight lines. Everything curved and flowed with no sharp corners or simple right angles. Training Hall Alpha was massive, with a ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness. The floor was covered in some kind of material that felt soft but looked solid. Strange equipment hung from the walls, most of it too alien for Lisa to guess its purpose. About 30 students were already there, representing at least 8 different species. Lisa recognized the Kethmorans and Veltarans from yesterday, but there were others she hadn't seen before. Small, furry creatures with large eyes chattered to each other in high-pitched voices. Tall, thin beings with too many joints moved with unsettling grace. Instructor Zexhai entered the hall, and all conversation stopped. The crystalline alien moved to the center of the room, its 4 arms spread wide. "Welcome to combat training," it announced. "Here you will learn the ancient arts of civilized warfare. Not the crude violence of primitive worlds, but refined techniques that have been perfected over thousands of years." Lisa felt her face grow hot. Every time Zexhai spoke, it seemed to be taking shots at humans without directly saying so. "Combat among civilized species is not about causing harm," the instructor continued. "It is about demonstrating skill, grace, and control. It is an art form as much as a martial discipline." Zexhai gestured to 2 Kethmoran students. "Vel and Kira, please demonstrate the opening forms of harmony fighting." The twins moved to the center of the hall and faced each other. What followed was unlike anything Lisa had ever seen. They moved like dancers, their bodies flowing through positions that seemed impossible. Their strikes were slow and precise, more like choreography than fighting. When one attacked, the other responded with a defensive movement that turned into a counterattack. The whole thing looked beautiful, but Lisa couldn't see how it would work in a real fight. Everything was too slow, too predictable. "Beautiful," Zexhai said when they finished. "Notice the economy of movement, the perfect balance between offense and defense. This is how civilized beings resolve conflicts." The instructor's eyes, which shifted through different colors, focused on Lisa. "Now let us see what the Deathworlder has learned from observing proper technique. Lisa Carter, please demonstrate your world's approach to combat." Lisa felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Her mouth went dry. "I don't understand. You want me to fight someone?" "Show us your natural instincts," Zexhai said. "Attack the practice dummy as you would if your life depended on it." A cylindrical object rose from the floor. It was roughly human-shaped and looked sturdy enough to take a beating. Lisa approached it cautiously, aware that everyone was watching her, Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Fast and hard, Lisa. In a real fight, pretty doesn't matter. Alive matters. Lisa struck the dummy with a quick combination. Right jab, left hook, knee strike to the midsection. The impacts sounded sharp and violent in the quiet hall. She finished with an elbow strike that would have dropped most human opponents. The silence that followed felt heavy. Lisa looked around at the other students and saw expressions ranging from shock to disgust. One of the small, furry aliens was actually covering its eyes. Fascinating, HFY said, but the word sounded like an insult. Observe the difference. Class. Where civilized technique emphasizes control and artistry, the Deathworlder relies on crude force and aggression. Notice how every movement is designed to cause maximum damage with no regard for elegance. Lisa felt her cheeks burn. On my world, fights aren't about looking pretty. They're about survival. Yes, HFY replied. Exactly my point. You come from a world where violence is the first solution to every problem. Here, we will teach you that there are better ways. The rest of the class focused on basic forms and breathing exercises. Lisa tried to follow along, but the movements felt wrong. Everything was too slow, too careful. Her body wanted to move faster, to strike harder. When combat training ended, the students filed out in small groups. Lisa noticed that most of them were giving her extra space, as if they thought she might attack at any moment. Cultural Studies was held in a circular room with no obvious front or back. Students sat on cushions that adjusted to their body types. The instructor was a being that looked like a walking tree, with bark-like skin and leaves for hair. Today, we discuss the concept of proportional response, the tree being said in a voice like rustling leaves. In civilized society, one's reaction to conflict must match the severity of the threat. Escalation is considered barbaric. Lisa raised her hand. What if someone's trying to kill you? The instructor's leaves rustled, which might have been laughter. An interesting question from our Deathworlder student. On most civilized worlds, such extreme situations simply do not arise. Conflicts are resolved through discussion, formal challenges, or at most, ceremonial combat. But what if they do arise? Lisa pressed. Then one calls for proper authorities and waits for assistance, replied one of the Kethmoran twins. Personal violence is the mark of an undeveloped society. Lisa bit back her first response. On New Montana, waiting for authorities usually meant being dead by the time they arrived. Galactic history was taught by a Veltaran who spoke in a monotone that made Lisa's eyelids heavy. The lesson covered the formation of the Galactic Federation and how civilized species had learned to coexist peacefully. Wars between civilized species ended over 1,000 years ago, the instructor droned. We have evolved beyond such primitive behaviors. Lisa wondered what these aliens would do if something like the Terran-Centauri War happened to them. Would their pretty fighting styles and diplomatic discussions stop actual invaders? The final class, Diplomatic Movement, turned out to be about body language and gesture. Different species interpreted the same movements in different ways, and students had to learn how to avoid accidentally insulting someone. Humans naturally stand with their shoulders back and wait forward, explained the instructor, another tree being. To most species, this appears aggressive and threatening. You must learn to adopt more peaceful postures. Lisa spent an hour practicing how to stand, sit, and walk in ways that wouldn't frighten other students. By the end of class, she felt like she was pretending to be someone else. Jake found her after classes ended. They walked to the dining hall in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. How was engineering? Lisa finally asked. Lonely, Jake admitted. The other students are brilliant, but they keep treating me like I might break their equipment. One of them actually asked if humans know how to use tools safely. At least you didn't have to spend 4 hours being told that everything about human culture is wrong, Lisa said. Dinner was quiet. They sat at the human table, which seemed smaller and more isolated than it had the day before. Lisa noticed other students glancing at them and whispering. She caught fragments of conversation in languages she didn't understand, but the tone was clear enough. "Maybe it gets better," Jake offered. Lisa poked at her food, which tasted like nothing. Maybe. Or maybe we're just supposed to pretend to be something we're not until they decide we're civilized enough. That night, Lisa lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The walls of her room shifted through soft colors that were supposed to be soothing, but they just reminded her how far from home she was. On New Montana, the nights were dark except for 2 moons and the distant glow of the defense perimeter. She thought about her father's lessons. Hit first, hit hard, never give your enemy a chance to recover. Here, those lessons were considered proof of human barbarism. But those same lessons had kept her family alive during predator attacks and raider incursions. Tomorrow would bring more combat training, more lessons about how humans needed to be fixed. Lisa's first morning at Nexus Academy began with a sound she had never heard before. Instead of alarm bells or buzzers, gentle music filled her room as the walls slowly brightened to mimic sunrise. She sat up in bed, confused for a moment about where she was. The schedule appeared on her wall display in flowing alien script that gradually translated to English. Combat training, cultural studies, galactic history, and something called diplomatic movement. She had no idea what that last one meant. Jake was waiting for her in the hallway, looking as lost as she felt. His hair stuck up in different directions, and his uniform was wrinkled. "Did you figure out the shower?" he asked. "Sort of," Lisa replied. "The water comes out in patterns instead of just spraying. I think I accidentally activated a massage cycle." They found their way to the dining hall, following a group of Kethmoran students who moved like they were floating. The blue-skinned aliens spoke in their musical language, occasionally glancing back at the humans with curious expressions. Breakfast was another challenge. The food looked normal enough, but Lisa couldn't identify most of it. She picked items that seemed safe and hoped for the best. Jake stuck to something that looked like bread and a fruit that tasted like a cross between an apple and cinnamon. "Attention, students," announced a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Report to your assigned training areas. First-year combat students report to Training Hall Alpha." Lisa and Jake followed signs through corridors that changed, direction in ways that hurt Lisa's brain to think about. The architecture seemed designed by beings who didn't think in straight lines. Everything curved and flowed with no sharp corners or simple right angles. Training Hall Alpha was massive, with a ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness. The floor was covered in some kind of material that felt soft but looked solid. Strange equipment hung from the walls, most of it too alien for Lisa to guess its purpose. About 30 students were already there, representing at least 8 different species. Lisa recognized the Kethmorans and Veltarans from yesterday, but there were others she hadn't seen before. Small, furry creatures with large eyes chattered to each other in high-pitched voices. Tall, thin beings with too many joints moved with unsettling grace. Instructor HFY entered the hall, and all conversation stopped. The crystalline alien moved to the center of the room, its 4 arms spread wide. "Welcome to combat training," it announced. "Here you will learn the ancient arts of civilized warfare. Not the crude violence of primitive worlds, but refined techniques that have been perfected over thousands of years." Lisa felt her face grow hot. Every time HFY spoke, it seemed to be taking shots at humans without directly saying so. "Combat among civilized species is not about causing harm," the instructor continued. "It is about demonstrating skill, grace, and control. It is an art form as much as a martial discipline." HFY gestured to 2 Kethmoran students. "Vel and Kira, please demonstrate the opening forms of harmony fighting." The twins moved to the center of the hall and faced each other. What followed was unlike anything Lisa had ever seen. They moved like dancers, their bodies flowing through positions that seemed impossible. Their strikes were slow and precise, more like choreography than fighting. When one attacked, the other responded with a defensive movement that turned into a counterattack. The whole thing looked beautiful, but Lisa couldn't see how it would work in a real fight. Everything was too slow, too predictable. Beautiful, HFY said when they finished. Notice the economy of movement, the perfect balance between offense and defense. This is how civilized beings resolve conflicts. The instructor's eyes, which shifted through different colors, focused on Lisa. Now let us see what the Deathworlder has learned from observing proper technique. Lisa Carter, please demonstrate your world's approach to combat. Lisa felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Her mouth went dry. I don't understand. You want me to fight someone? Show us your natural instincts, HFY said. Attack the practice dummy as you would if your life depended on it. A cylindrical object rose from the floor. It was roughly human-shaped and looked sturdy enough to take a beating. Lisa approached it cautiously, aware that everyone was watching her. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Fast and hard, Lisa. In a real fight, pretty doesn't matter. Alive matters. Lisa struck the dummy with a quick combination. Right jab, left hook, knee strike to the midsection. The impacts sounded sharp and violent in the quiet hall. She finished with an elbow strike that would have dropped most human opponents. The silence that followed felt heavy. Lisa looked around at the other students and saw expressions ranging from shock to disgust. One of the small, furry aliens was actually covering its eyes. Fascinating, HFY said, but the word sounded like an insult. Observe the difference. Class. Where civilized technique emphasizes control and artistry, the Deathworlder relies on crude force and aggression. Notice how every movement is designed to cause maximum damage with no regard for elegance. Lisa felt her cheeks burn. On my world, fights aren't about looking pretty. They're about survival. Yes, HFY replied. Exactly my point. You come from a world where violence is the first solution to every problem. Here, we will teach you that there are better ways. The rest of the class focused on basic forms and breathing exercises. Lisa tried to follow along, but the movements felt wrong. Everything was too slow, too careful. Her body wanted to move faster, to strike harder. When combat training ended, the students filed out in small groups. Lisa noticed that most of them were giving her extra space, as if they thought she might attack at any moment. Cultural studies was held in a circular room with no obvious front or back. Students sat on cushions that adjusted to their body types. The instructor was a being that looked like a walking tree, with bark-like skin and leaves for hair. Today, we discuss the concept of proportional response, the tree being said in a voice like rustling leaves. In civilized society, one's reaction to conflict must match the severity of the threat. Escalation is considered barbaric. Lisa raised her hand. What if someone's trying to kill you? The instructor's leaves rustled, which might have been laughter. An interesting question from our Deathworlder student. On most civilized worlds, such extreme situations simply do not arise. Conflicts are resolved through discussion, formal challenges, or at most, ceremonial combat. But what if they do arise? Lisa pressed. Then one calls for proper authorities and waits for assistance, replied one of the Kethmoran twins. Personal violence is the mark of an undeveloped society. Lisa bit back her first response. On New Montana, waiting for authorities usually meant being dead by the time they arrived. Galactic history was taught by a Veltaran who spoke in a monotone that made Lisa's eyelids heavy. The lesson covered the formation of the Galactic Federation and how civilized species had learned to coexist peacefully. Wars between civilized species ended over 1,000 years ago, the instructor droned. We have evolved beyond such primitive behaviors. Lisa wondered what these aliens would do if something like the Terran-Centauri War happened to them. Would their pretty fighting styles and diplomatic discussions stop actual invaders? The final class, Diplomatic Movement, turned out to be about body language and gesture. Different species interpreted the same movements in different ways, and students had to learn how to avoid accidentally insulting someone. Humans naturally stand with their shoulders back and wait forward, explained the instructor. Another, tree being. To most species, this appears aggressive and threatening. You must learn to adopt more peaceful postures. Lisa spent an hour practicing how to stand, sit, and walk in ways that wouldn't frighten other students. By the end of class, she felt like she was pretending to be someone else. Jake found her after classes ended. They walked to the dining hall in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. "How was engineering?" Lisa finally asked. "Lonely," Jake admitted. "The other students are brilliant, but they keep treating me like I might break their equipment. One of them actually asked if humans know how to use tools safely." "At least you didn't have to spend 4 hours being told that everything about human culture is wrong," Lisa said. Dinner was quiet. They sat at the human table, which seemed smaller and more isolated than it had the day before. Lisa noticed other students glancing at them and whispering. She caught fragments of conversation in languages she didn't understand, but the tone was clear enough. "Maybe it gets better," Jake offered. Lisa poked at her food, which tasted like nothing. Maybe. Or maybe we're just supposed to pretend to be something we're not until they decide we're civilized enough. That night, Lisa lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The walls of her room shifted through soft colors that were supposed to be soothing, but they just reminded her how far from home she was. On New Montana, the nights were dark except for 2 moons and the distant glow of the defense perimeter. She thought about her father's lessons. Hit first, hit hard, never give your enemy a chance to recover. Here, those lessons were considered proof of human barbarism. But those same lessons had kept her family alive during predator attacks and raider incursions. Tomorrow would bring more combat training, more lessons about how humans needed to be fixed. 3 weeks had passed since Lisa's arrival at Nexus Academy, and each day felt harder than the last. She had tried to adapt to the alien way of doing things, but everything felt wrong. The flowing combat techniques made no sense to her body, which wanted to move fast and strike hard. The diplomatic classes taught her to make herself smaller and less threatening, which went against every survival instinct she had. The other students had started to relax around her a little, but Lisa could still feel their eyes watching her every move. They expected her to do something violent and primitive at any moment. Even Jake was spending more time with his engineering classmates now, leaving Lisa feeling more isolated than ever. Combat training had become the worst part of her day. Instructor HFY seemed to take special pleasure in pointing out every mistake she made, always with comments about Deathworlder instincts and primitive responses. Lisa had learned to keep her mouth shut and her face blank, but inside she was burning with frustration. Today felt different from the moment she woke up. The artificial sunrise seemed too bright, and the gentle music that was supposed to be calming sounded like fingernails on metal. Lisa dressed carefully in her training uniform, making sure everything was perfect. She couldn't give HFY any reason to criticize her appearance. The dining hall was busy with the usual morning rush. Lisa ate quickly, not really tasting her food. She had learned to identify most of the alien dishes by now, but nothing felt familiar or comforting. Everything reminded her that she was far from home, trying to fit into a world that didn't want her. Jake found her as she was finishing breakfast. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes. "Rough night?" Lisa asked. "Group project," Jake replied, sitting down with a plate of something that looked like purple eggs. "The other students are starting to accept my ideas, but they still check everything I do 3 times. They're convinced human engineering is too dangerous for practical use." Lisa understood the feeling. In combat class, every technique she suggested was dismissed as too violent or too crude. It didn't matter that her methods were effective. What mattered was that they weren't elegant enough for civilized beings. "Maybe we should just give up and transfer back to Earth," Lisa said. Jake shook his head. My parents spent everything they had to get me here. I can't go back empty-handed. Besides, some of the alien technology is incredible. If I can learn it and bring it home, I could help improve life on the colonies." Lisa admired Jake's determination, but she wasn't sure she shared it anymore. Every day at the academy felt like a test she was designed to fail. Training Hall Alpha was already busy when they arrived. Students were practicing the flowing movements. They had learned, their bodies moving in perfect harmony with invisible rhythms. Lisa watched the Kethmaran twins perform a complex sequence that looked more like a dance than fighting. Their movements were beautiful, but Lisa couldn't see how they would stop someone who was actually trying to hurt them. "Attention, students," Zexhi's voice rang out across the hall. "Today we will have a special demonstration. I want to show you the difference between refined technique and primitive instinct." Lisa felt her stomach drop. She had a bad feeling about where this was heading. "Lisa Carter," the instructor called. "Please come to the center of the hall." Every conversation stopped. 30 pairs of alien eyes turned to watch as Lisa walked to the center of the training area. Her legs felt heavy, and her mouth was dry. "Today you will spar with Vel," Zexhi announced. "Vel is one of our most advanced students, a perfect example of what proper training can achieve. This demonstration will show the class how superior technique overcomes raw aggression." Vel stepped forward, moving with the fluid grace that all Kethmarans seemed to possess. The blue-skinned alien was taller than Lisa and moved like water flowing downhill. Lisa had watched Vel in previous classes and knew the alien was skilled. But more importantly, Vel had never shown any hostility toward humans. "The rules are simple," Zexhi continued. "This is a demonstration, not a real fight. Use only the techniques taught in this class. The match ends when one participant yields or is unable to continue." Lisa faced Vel in the center of the hall. The Kethmoran gave her a small bow, which Lisa returned awkwardly. She tried to remember the flowing forms she had been taught, but her body wanted to drop into the combat stance her father had drilled into her. "Begin," Zexhi commanded. Vel moved first, gliding forward with a technique that looked like a cross between dancing and swimming. Lisa tried to respond with the defensive form she had learned, but her movements felt clumsy compared to Vel's natural grace. The Kethmaran's first strike was slow and controlled, aimed at Lisa's shoulder. Lisa blocked it easily, but Vel flowed immediately into the next movement, attacking from a different angle. Lisa blocked again, but she was already falling behind the rhythm of the fight. "Notice how the civilized student maintains perfect form even under pressure," Zexhi's voice carried across the hall. "Compare this to the Deathworlders' crude blocking techniques." Lisa felt her cheeks burn, but she tried to focus on the fight. Vel was good, but the movements were still too slow for Lisa's liking. Every attack was telegraphed well in advance, giving her plenty of time to defend. But defending wasn't enough. Vel's flowing style created constant pressure, with each blocked attack becoming the setup for the next one. Lisa found herself being pushed steadily backward, unable to mount any offense of her own. "The Deathworlder cannot find an opening," Zexhi observed. "Primitive techniques are helpless against proper training." Lisa tried to ignore the commentary and focus on the match, but Zexhi's voice kept cutting through her concentration. Every move she made was criticized, every defensive technique dismissed as crude or ineffective. The other students were watching in silence, but Lisa could feel their judgment. To them, this wasn't just a sparring match. It was proof that humans didn't belong at their academy. Vel executed a particularly complex combination that ended with Lisa on her back. The Kethmaran immediately stepped back and offered a hand to help her up. There was no mockery in Vel's expression, just professional respect. "Again," Zexhi commanded. "The lesson is not complete." Lisa got back into position, her frustration building. The second round went much like the first, with Vel's superior technique gradually overwhelming Lisa's defenses. This time, Lisa managed to stay on her feet, but she was clearly losing. Observe how helpless the Deathworlder becomes when deprived of violence, HFY commented. Without the ability to strike with brutal force, primitive fighters have no strategy. That comment hit Lisa like a physical blow. She wasn't helpless. She was holding back, trying to fight like an alien instead of like a human. Her father had taught her dozens of techniques that would end this fight in seconds, but using them would prove HFY's point about human brutality. The third round began, and Lisa found herself getting angry. Not at Vel, who was just following orders and fighting fairly, but at the whole situation. She was tired of being called primitive, tired of being told that everything about her culture was wrong, tired of pretending to be something she wasn't. Vel came at her with the same flowing attack pattern, and Lisa responded with the same defensive techniques. But this time, her blocks were harder, more aggressive. She wasn't just defending anymore. She was looking for an opening. The Deathworlder grows frustrated, HFY observed with what sounded like satisfaction. Notice how quickly they resort to increased aggression when their limited skills fail them. Lisa's vision started to narrow. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, and her hands were starting to shake with suppressed anger. Vel's next attack came in slow motion, and Lisa could see 3 different ways to counter it that would put the Catamaran on the ground. But she held back. She blocked the attack properly and tried to respond with a technique from class. Her movement was clumsy with anger, and Vel easily avoided it. "Perhaps we should end this demonstration," Vel said quietly. "The human seems distressed." "No," HFY replied. "The lesson must be complete. Continue until she yields." Lisa looked up at the instructor's crystalline face and saw something that made her blood run cold. HFY was enjoying this. The alien was taking pleasure in her humiliation, in proving that humans were inferior. "I said continue," HFY commanded when both fighters hesitated. Vel looked apologetic but raised their hands again. Lisa got back into position, but something had changed. The careful control she had maintained for 3 weeks was starting to crack. Deep inside her chest, she could feel something dangerous stirring to life. The pressure was building, and Lisa knew that soon it would have to go somewhere. The 4th round of sparring began with Vel moving even more carefully than before. The Catamaran had noticed Lisa's growing anger and was trying to keep the demonstration from escalating. But HFY wasn't satisfied with the level of humiliation yet. "Stop!" the instructor commanded. Both fighters froze in position. "This is taking too long. The Deathworlder is not learning the lesson." Lisa wiped sweat from her forehead, grateful for the break. Her muscles were tense with frustration, and she could feel her control slipping with each passing minute. The other students were watching her like she was some kind of dangerous animal that might break free from its cage. "Vel, step aside," HFY ordered. "I will demonstrate proper technique myself." A murmur went through the watching students. Instructors rarely participated in demonstrations, especially against first-year students. Vel looked uncertain, but moved back to join the other students along the wall. HFY strode to the center of the hall, its crystalline skin catching the light and throwing rainbow patterns across the floor. With 4 arms and decades of training, the instructor was obviously far more skilled than any student. "This will show you the true difference between civilized technique and primitive instinct," HFY announced to the class. "Watch how easily proper training overcomes raw aggression." Lisa felt a cold knot form in her stomach. This wasn't going to be a fair demonstration. HFY was setting her up for complete humiliation in front of the entire class. "Attack me with your natural human techniques," the instructor commanded. "Show everyone what Deathworlder combat looks like." Lisa hesitated. Using her real fighting style would only prove HFY's point about human brutality. But she was trapped. If she refused, she would look cowardly. If she used the alien techniques, she would be outclassed completely. "I would prefer to continue practicing the forms we've learned in class," Lisa said carefully. HFY's crystalline features shifted into what might have been a smile. No, I want to see your true nature. Fight as your primitive world taught you. The words hit Lisa like a slap. Everything about her home was being called primitive, worthless, savage. Her father's careful lessons, her mother's patient training, the traditions that had kept humans alive on hostile worlds for generations. All of it dismissed as the crude behavior of undeveloped beings. Come now, Zexhai continued. Surely you're not afraid to show us what you really are? Lisa looked around the hall at the watching faces. Some looked curious. Others seemed uncomfortable with what was happening. But none of them spoke up. They all wanted to see the human lose control, to confirm their beliefs about Deathworlder nature. Fine, Lisa said quietly. She dropped into the combat stance her father had taught her. Weight balanced, hands up, ready to move in any direction. It felt good to stop pretending, even if it was going to end badly for her. Zexhai's posture shifted as well, but the instructor's stance was completely different. All four arms moved in slow, hypnotic patterns, like a deadly dance. The alien's feet barely touched the ground as it began to circle Lisa. Observe, Zexhai called to the students. The Deathworlder adopts an aggressive posture immediately. No grace, no artistry, just preparation for violence. Lisa ignored the commentary and focused on her opponent. Zexhai was fast, probably faster than anyone she had ever fought. But the instructor was also showing off, making movements more elaborate than necessary. Lisa attacked first, throwing a quick jab to test Zexhai's defenses. The instructor deflected it easily with one arm, while the other three continued their flowing patterns. The counterattack came instantly, a light tap to Lisa's shoulder that sent her stumbling. Too slow, Zexhai observed. Deathworlder techniques rely on crude force, but they lack the speed and precision of proper training. Lisa reset and tried again, this time with a combination her father had drilled into her thousands of times. Right cross, left hook, knee strike. Zexhai flowed around the attacks like water, making them look clumsy and predictable. The instructor's counter-strike was harder this time, catching Lisa in the ribs and knocking the breath out of her. She staggered back, gasping. Notice how the primitive fighter becomes winded quickly, Zexhai continued his running commentary. Proper technique conserves energy while inefficient movements waste it. Lisa was getting angry now, but she tried to keep her head clear. Zexhai wanted her to lose control, to prove that humans were savage animals. She wouldn't give the instructor that satisfaction. She came in again, this time trying to use her smaller size and lower center of gravity to her advantage. But Zexhai had too much reach and too much experience. Every attack Lisa threw was turned aside, and every counter-strike found its mark. The Deathworlder grows desperate, Zexhai announced. Watch how quickly they abandon any pretense of technique when faced with superior skill. That wasn't true. Lisa was still fighting smart, still trying to find openings and create opportunities. But Zexhai was making it sound like she was just throwing wild punches. The next exchange left Lisa on her knees, gasping for air. Zexhai had struck her in the solar plexus with precise timing, shutting down her ability to breathe properly. The instructor stood over her, not even breathing hard. Perhaps this has gone far enough, said a voice from the watching students. Lisa looked up to see Jake stepping forward, his face pale with worry. The demonstration is not complete, Zexhai replied coldly. The Deathworlder has not yet learned her lesson. What lesson? Jake demanded. That you're bigger and stronger and more experienced? We already knew that. Zexhai's crystalline eyes shifted to focus on Jake. The lesson that your species must abandon its primitive ways if you wish to join civilized society. Violence is not the answer to every problem. She's been trying to learn your ways for 3 weeks, Jake shot back. You're the one who demanded she fight like a human. Enough, Zexhai commanded. Return to your place, or join your friend on the floor. Jake looked like he wanted to say more, but Lisa caught his eye and shook her head slightly. She didn't want him to get in trouble for defending her. Lisa struggled back to her feet, her ribs aching where HFY had struck her. The instructor was watching her with those shifting, crystalline eyes, waiting for her to either yield or attack again. "Continue," HFY ordered. Lisa raised her hands again, but her heart wasn't in it anymore. She was outclassed, and everyone in the room knew it. This wasn't about teaching her anything. This was about breaking her spirit. She threw a half-hearted punch that HFY easily avoided. The instructor's counterattack was swift and precise, catching Lisa across the face. She felt her nose crunch under the impact, and blood began streaming down her face. The pain was sharp and immediate, but it wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the sound of satisfaction in HFY's voice as the instructor spoke to the class. "This is what happens when deathworlders face proper technique," HFY announced, standing over Lisa as she held her broken nose. "Raw aggression cannot overcome refined skill. Perhaps now the human understands the futility of primitive methods." Blood dripped between Lisa's fingers as she looked up at the instructor. HFY was enjoying this moment, savoring her humiliation. The alien had used this demonstration to prove a point about human inferiority, and now it was over. Except it wasn't over. Lisa wiped blood from her face with the back of her hand and stood up slowly. Something had changed in her expression, something that made several students take an unconscious step backward. For 3 weeks, she had tried to be what they wanted her to be. She had swallowed insults, endured condescension, and suppressed every instinct that made her human. She had let them call her primitive, savage, and undeveloped. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had hurt her, and now they expected her to stay hurt. Lisa looked at HFY and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. For the first time since arriving at Nexus Academy, Lisa Carter was about to show them what a Deathworlder could really do. The hall fell completely silent, as 30 seconds of perfect stillness stretched between them. HFY continued talking, explaining to the class about human limitations and the superiority of civilized technique. The instructor had no idea that everything was about to change. Time seemed to slow as Lisa stood in the center of the training hall, blood dripping from her broken nose onto the soft floor. 30 seconds passed while HFY continued explaining to the class about the superiority of civilized combat techniques. The instructor's voice filled the silence, but Lisa wasn't listening anymore. Instead, she was remembering. She remembered her father's first lesson when she was 8 years old. "Lisa, on New Montana, there are things that want to kill you. Big things with teeth and claws. Pretty fighting won't stop them. When something tries to hurt you or your family, you end the threat as fast as possible." She remembered her mother teaching her about pressure points and joint locks. "Every creature has weak spots, honey. Even the biggest predator goes down if you know where to hit." She remembered the night raiders attacked their settlement. She was 12 then, hiding in the root cellar while her parents fought off attackers who wanted to steal their supplies. The sounds of real violence above her head, not the gentle dancing they called combat here. She remembered why her family had sent her to this place, not to be fixed or civilized, but to learn and bring knowledge back home, to make their dangerous world a little safer for the children who would come after her. All of this flashed through Lisa's mind in those 30 seconds while HFY talked. The instructor was explaining how Deathworlders needed to abandon their violent nature to join galactic society. How humans were too primitive to understand true martial arts. Lisa wiped more blood from her face and looked around the hall. The other students were watching her with a mixture of pity and disgust. They thought this was over. They thought she had learned her lesson about challenging superior beings. They were about to discover how wrong they were. "The human appears to be in shock," HFY observed, still speaking to the class. "This is typical when Deathworlders realize their limitations. Perhaps now she will be more receptive to proper instruction." Lisa's smile grew wider. The instructor still had its back half turned to her, confident that the demonstration was over. All 4 crystalline arms were relaxed, and HFY's stance was casual. It was exactly the kind of mistake that got people killed on New Montana. Lisa moved. Everything her father had taught her about speed and surprise came flooding back. No wasted motion, no telegraphed attacks, no fancy techniques that looked pretty but took too long. Just simple, brutal efficiency. Her first step closed half the distance to HFY before the instructor realized she was moving. Her second step brought her into range, and by then it was too late for the alien to react properly. Lisa's attack wasn't the flowing, artistic combat the Academy taught. It was pure deathworlder violence, honed by generations of humans who had learned that hesitation meant death. Her left hand snapped out in a feint toward HFY's head, drawing the instructor's attention and 3 of its 4 arms into defensive positions. But the real attack was already coming from a different angle. Lisa's right knee drove upward into HFY's lower torso with all the force she could generate. The impact lifted the taller alien slightly off the ground and doubled it over in pain. Before HFY could recover, Lisa's elbow came down hard on the back of the instructor's neck. The crystalline alien staggered forward, gasping for air. Its perfect stance was gone, replaced by the awkward posture of someone trying not to fall down. But Lisa wasn't finished. She grabbed HFY's extended left arm with both hands, the same arm the instructor had used to break her nose. For a moment, their eyes met, and Lisa saw something she had never seen in the alien's crystalline features before. Fear. "This is what my primitive world taught me," Lisa said quietly, so only HFY could hear. Then she applied the joint lock her mother had shown her when she was 10 years old. Twist, leverage, and pressure in exactly the right direction. The boop sound of HFY's arm breaking was like glass shattering. The instructor's scream echoed through the hall as it collapsed to its knees, cradling the shattered arm against its chest. The crystalline skin around the break had gone dark, and strange fluids leaked from the cracks. Complete silence filled the training hall. 30 students and 1 instructor stared at Lisa in shock. No one moved, no one spoke, no one seemed to even breathe. Lisa stood over HFY, blood still streaming from her nose, her clothes torn and dirty from the earlier beating. She didn't look civilized or refined. She looked dangerous. "You asked me to show you what a deathworlder looks like," Lisa said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "This is what we look like when someone breaks our nose and expects us to say thank you." Jake was the first to move, stepping forward with his hands raised peacefully. "Lisa, it's over. You need to step back now." Lisa looked at him and blinked, as if waking up from a dream. The cold rage that had driven her attack was already fading, replaced by shock at what she had done. She looked down at HFY, who was still writhing in pain on the floor. "I didn't mean to—" she started, then stopped. That wasn't true. She had meant to hurt HFY, had wanted to show the arrogant instructor what human fighting really looked like. The other students were backing away from her now, their earlier pity replaced by genuine fear. Even the Kethmoran twins, who had always been polite to her, were staring at her like she was some kind of monster. "Someone call medical," Jake said urgently. "The instructor needs help." 2 students ran from the hall, probably to get security as well as medical assistance. Lisa realized she was in serious trouble. She had just assaulted an instructor in front of 30 witnesses. There would be consequences, probably including immediate expulsion and criminal charges. But as she looked around at the fearful faces surrounding her, Lisa found she didn't regret what she had done. For 3 weeks, she had tried to be what they wanted her to be. She had accepted insults, endured humiliation, and suppressed everything that made her human. They had pushed her too far, and now they knew what happened when you cornered a deathworlder. Medical teams arrived within minutes, along with Academy security. They carefully loaded HFY onto a floating stretcher, the instructor's crystalline arm secured in some kind of stabilizing field. As they carried the alien away, HFY's eyes found Lisa's one last time. There was no longer any condescension in that look, only pain and perhaps a new understanding of what humans were really capable of. "Lisa Carter," said the head of security, a being that looked like an upright bear with too many eyes. "You're under arrest for assault on an academy instructor. Please come with us." Lisa nodded and held out her hands. They placed restraints on her that felt like soft metal bands, probably designed to hold beings much stronger than humans. She looked back at Jake as they led her away. "Call my parents," she said. "Tell them what happened." "I will," Jake promised. "And Lisa, I'm proud of you." The security team led her through corridors that seemed different now, less welcoming and more like a prison. Students and instructors stopped to stare as she passed, whispers following in her wake. Lisa kept her head up as they walked. She had shown them what a deathworlder could do when pushed too far. She had proven that humans weren't helpless when they stopped trying to be something they weren't. The question now was whether the galaxy was ready to accept what that meant. As they reached the detention area, Lisa caught her reflection in a polished wall panel. Her nose was swollen and crooked, her uniform was stained with blood, and her hair was a mess. She looked exactly like what she was, a human who had been in a fight and won. For the first time in 3 weeks, Lisa felt like herself again. The detention cell was smaller than Lisa's dorm room, with walls that glowed with a soft blue light. There was a simple bench, a waste facility, and nothing else. The restraints on her wrists had been removed once the door sealed, but Lisa knew. There was no way out until someone decided to let her go. She sat on the bench and gingerly touched her nose. It was definitely broken, but the bleeding had stopped. Her ribs ached where HFY had struck her, and her knuckles were scraped from the brief fight. But overall, she felt better than she had in weeks. For 3 weeks, she had been trying to squeeze herself into a shape that didn't fit. Now, for better or worse, everyone knew exactly what she was. The door chimed, and Jake walked in carrying a medical kit. His face was pale, and his hands shook slightly as he sat down beside her. "How bad is the trouble?" Lisa asked. "Bad," Jake replied, opening the medical kit. "HFY's arm is completely shattered. They have him in regeneration therapy, but it's going to take weeks to heal properly." Jake started cleaning the blood from Lisa's face with antiseptic wipes. His touch was gentle, but Lisa could see the worry in his eyes. "The whole academy is talking about it," he continued. "Some students are saying you tried to kill an instructor. Others are saying HFY pushed you too far and got what he deserved." "What do you think?" Lisa asked. Jake was quiet for a moment, as he applied a healing patch to her nose. "I think you did what any human would do in that situation, but I also think most of the galaxy isn't ready to understand that." The door chimed again, and Dean Morthak entered. The ancient Kethamaran moved slowly, his blue skin faded with age, and his white hair flowing like water around his shoulders. He had been running Nexus Academy for over 200 years, and his eyes held the weight of that experience. "Jake, Phillips, please leave us," the dean said in his musical voice. Jake looked at Lisa, who nodded. "It's okay. I'll see you later." After Jake left, Dean Morthak sat down across from Lisa. He studied her with eyes that seemed to see everything, and Lisa felt like she was being examined under a microscope. "In 2 centuries of running this academy," the dean began, "no student has ever seriously injured an instructor. You have set quite a precedent, Miss Carter." "I'm sorry about that," Lisa said, though she wasn't sure if she meant it. "Are you?" "Truly?" The dean's head tilted slightly. "Because from what I observed in the security recordings, your attack was very precise. You could have done much more damage but chose not to." Lisa was surprised that he had noticed that. "I didn't want to kill him. I just wanted him to stop. Stop what exactly? Stop humiliating me. Stop calling humans primitive. Stop treating me like I was some kind of animal that needed to be trained. Lisa felt her anger rising again and forced herself to stay calm. Dean Morthak nodded slowly. Instructor HFY has been teaching combat at this academy for 30 years. He is widely respected for his knowledge of martial arts. He's also a bully, Lisa said flatly, and he enjoyed hurting me. That is a serious accusation. It's also true. You can check your recordings if you don't believe me. The dean was quiet for a long moment. The Academy Board is meeting tomorrow to decide your fate. Some members want you expelled immediately. Others are calling for criminal charges. Lisa felt her stomach drop. She had known this was coming, but hearing it made it real. However, the dean continued, some interesting things have happened since your altercation with Instructor HFY. What kind of things? 3 separate species have contacted the Academy requesting information about human combat techniques. Apparently, news of your demonstration has spread quickly through diplomatic circles. Lisa blinked in surprise. They want to learn human fighting? They want to understand it. There is a difference. The dean stood and walked to the small window that looked out into space. For centuries, the galactic community has dismissed deathworlder species as primitive. But your actions today have forced some people to reconsider that assumption. I don't understand. Dean Morthak turned back to face her. In 30 seconds, you defeated an instructor who has trained for decades. You used techniques that our best martial artists cannot understand or counter, whether you intended to or not. You have proven that there is value in what you call human fighting. Lisa thought about this. Does that mean I'm not in trouble? Oh, you are definitely in trouble, the dean said with what might have been a smile. But the nature of that trouble may be different than you expect. Before Lisa could ask what he meant, the door chimed again. This time, a group of beings entered that Lisa had never seen before. They wore formal robes and moved with the authority of people used to being obeyed. The Academy Board, Dean Morthak explained quietly. The lead figure was another Keth Moran, even older than the dean. Behind him came representatives from half a dozen species, including a Veltaran that looked similar to HFY, but older and more weathered. Lisa Carter, the lead board member announced in a voice like distant thunder. You stand accused of assault against an academy instructor. How do you answer these charges? Lisa stood up, trying to project more confidence than she felt. I was defending myself. Defending yourself? The Veltaran board member stepped forward. You broke an instructor's arm after the combat demonstration was over. The demonstration was over when he broke my nose, Lisa replied. Everything after that was personal. A murmur went through the board members. They spoke to each other in languages Lisa didn't understand, their voices mixing into a symphony of alien communication. Finally, the lead Keth Moran spoke again. The security recordings show that Instructor HFY struck you in what appeared to be a controlled demonstration. Your response was disproportionate. Disproportionate by whose standards? Lisa asked. On my world, someone breaks your nose and stands over you talking about how superior they are. You break something of theirs back. That's proportionate. You are not on your world now, the Veltaran said coldly. You are in civilized space, where we have moved beyond such primitive concepts of justice. Lisa felt her temper flare again. There was nothing civilized about what HFY did to me. He used that demonstration to humiliate me in front of the entire class. He enjoyed hurting me. That is your perception, the Veltaran replied. Instructor, HFY was providing education about the limitations of deathworlder combat techniques. By beating up a student half his size, Lisa shot back. By breaking my nose and then bragging about it? Some education. The board members exchanged more. Alien conversations. Lisa could feel her future being decided in languages she couldn't understand by beings who thought her entire species was primitive. However, the lead Kethamoran said finally. "We cannot ignore the fact that your demonstration has generated significant interest throughout the galaxy. Several species have formally requested that we study human combat techniques." "What does that mean?" Lisa asked. Dean Morthak stepped forward. "It means, Miss Carter, that you have created a problem for this academy, but you may also have created an opportunity." The board members continued their discussion for several more minutes. Lisa stood in the middle of the group, feeling like a specimen being examined by scientists. Finally, they seemed to reach some kind of agreement. "Lisa Carter," the lead board member announced, "you will face formal disciplinary action for your assault on Instructor HFY. However, given the unique circumstances and the broader implications of this incident, we are prepared to offer you an alternative to expulsion." Lisa's heart started beating faster. "What kind of alternative?" "You will serve as a cultural consultant to help the Academy develop new courses in Deathworlder combat philosophy. You will also provide guest instruction to students who wish to understand human fighting techniques." Lisa stared at them in shock. "You want me to teach other students how to fight like a human?" "We want you to help us understand why human techniques are effective," the dean clarified, "and perhaps more. Importantly, we want to understand why our techniques failed so completely against yours." Lisa looked around at the faces of the board members. Some looked curious, others seemed skeptical, but none of them looked at her with the contempt she had grown used to. "What happens to HFY?" "Instructor HFY will undergo sensitivity training regarding the treatment of Deathworlder students," the lead board member said. "His teaching methods will also be reviewed." It wasn't the punishment Lisa had hoped for, but it was something. "Do I have a choice in this?" she asked. "You can accept our offer," the dean said, "or you can face full criminal charges and certain expulsion." Lisa thought about her parents back on New Montana, about the money they had spent to send her here, about Jake and his dreams of bringing alien technology home. "I accept," she said. The board members nodded and began filing out of the detention cell. As they left, the lead Kethamoran paused at the door. "Miss Carter," he said, "tomorrow you begin teaching the galaxy what it means to be human. I suggest you prepare yourself for that responsibility." After they left, Lisa sat back down on the bench. In the space of one afternoon, she had gone from problem student to cultural consultant. She wasn't sure if this was better or worse than being expelled. But for the first time since arriving at Nexus Academy, she felt like her knowledge and skills had value. Maybe that was a start. The formal hearing took place 3 days later in the Academy's main council chamber. Lisa had never seen the room before, and its size overwhelmed her. The ceiling stretched up so high it disappeared into shadows, and the walls curved in impossible ways that made her eyes water if she looked too long. Representatives from dozens of species filled the chamber. Some sat in traditional chairs, others floated in water tanks, and a few hung from perches near the ceiling. At the center of it all was a raised platform where Lisa sat next to a human diplomat who had arrived from Earth the day before. Ambassador Patricia Wells was a stern woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. She had spent 20 years representing human interests in galactic politics, and she had made it clear to Lisa that this hearing was about much more than one student's discipline. "This is bigger than you realize," Ambassador Wells had told Lisa during their preparation meeting. "The galaxy is watching to see how we handle conflict with other species. Your actions have sparked debates on a dozen worlds about the nature of violence and self-defense." Across from them sat Instructor HFY, his shattered arm encased in a regeneration sleeve that glowed with soft light. The Veltaran's crystalline skin looked duller than before, and he moved carefully, as if still in pain. Beside HFY sat his advocate, an elderly Veltaran named Korthek, who was considered one of the finest legal minds in the galaxy. The aliens. Presence made it clear that this was being treated as a serious criminal matter. Dean Morthak served as the presiding judge, flanked by board members from the major galactic species. Behind them, a viewing gallery held dozens of observers, including many students from the academy. This hearing will determine whether Lisa Carter's actions constitute criminal assault or justifiable self-defense, Dean Morthak announced. We will examine not only the events themselves, but the cultural context that led to this unprecedented incident. Korthek rose first, his crystalline form catching the light as he moved to the center of the chamber. His voice resonated with authority as he began his presentation. Honored judges, what we witnessed 3 days ago was a savage attack by a primitive being upon a respected instructor. HFY was conducting a legitimate educational demonstration when he was brutally assaulted by a student who chose violence. Overlearning. The advocate activated a holographic display that showed the security recording of the incident. Lisa watched herself break HFY's arm again, and the sound made her stomach twist with guilt. Observe the precision of the attack, Korthek continued. This was not a moment of panic or self-defense. This was calculated violence designed to cause maximum harm. The human waited 30 seconds, planned her attack, and then executed it with the cold efficiency of a born killer. Lisa felt the eyes of the gallery upon her, and she forced herself to sit still. This was exactly what she had expected. They would paint her as a savage animal who couldn't control her violent instincts. Instructor HFY's actions were entirely appropriate, the advocate went on. A controlled strike to demonstrate proper technique, followed by educational commentary. The human's response was wildly disproportionate and represents exactly the kind of behavior that makes Deathworlder, species unsuitable for civilized society. Korthek gestured to HFY, who struggled to his feet with his injured arm. This respected educator may never regain full use of his limb. His crime? Attempting to teach a primitive being the difference between refined technique and crude violence. When the advocate finished, Ambassador Wells rose to present Lisa's defense. The human diplomat was smaller than most beings in the chamber, but her voice carried clearly through the vast space. Honored judges, what you have just heard is a perfect example of cultural ignorance disguised as legal argument. The advocate speaks of controlled strikes and educational commentary, but let us examine what actually occurred. Ambassador Wells activated her own holographic display, showing the same recording from a different angle. This time, the focus was on HFY's expressions and body language throughout the demonstration. Watch the instructor's face, Wells said. This is not the expression of someone providing education. This is someone enjoying the humiliation of another being. Notice how the strikes become harder as the demonstration continues. Observe how the instructor prolongs the encounter well beyond any educational necessity. The recording showed HFY's crystalline features shifting as he struck Lisa repeatedly, and Lisa could see what Ambassador Wells meant. There was satisfaction in the alien's movements, a cruel pleasure in demonstrating his superiority. Now observe the final moments, Wells continued. The instructor breaks the student's nose and then stands over her, making comments about human inferiority while she bleeds on the floor. In human culture, this behavior has a name. We call it bullying. A murmur went through the chamber. Several species began discussing among themselves in their native languages, their voices creating a symphony of alien sounds. The advocate claims that Lisa Carter waited 30 seconds to plan her attack. Ambassador Wells continued. I submit that she waited 30 seconds to regain control of herself. For 3 weeks, this young woman had endured constant insults about her species, her culture, and her worth. She had been pushed to her breaking point and beyond. Wells gestured to Lisa, who stood up as they had practiced. Lisa Carter is not a savage. She is a 17-year-old student who was trained from childhood to defend herself and others. When Instructor HFY broke her nose and then humiliated her further, she responded exactly as any human would respond. She ended the threat. But was there truly a threat? Asked one of the board members, a tree-like being whose leaves rustled as it spoke. The instructor had already demonstrated his superiority. The educational portion was complete. Ambassador, Wells nodded. An excellent question. Let me answer it with a comparison. Imagine if I came to your world and declared that your people were primitive. Imagine if I subjected your children to public humiliation while claiming it was for their own good. How would your species respond? The tree being's leaves rustled more rapidly. We would object strongly to such treatment. As would any self-respecting species, Wells replied. The difference is that humans come from a world where objecting strongly means taking immediate action to stop the threat. We cannot afford to wait for proper authorities or formal complaints when something is trying to hurt us. Jake stood, up in the gallery, and Dean Morthak nodded for him to speak. I've been Lisa's friend since we arrived here, Jake said, his voice shaking slightly. She tried harder than anyone to fit in, to learn your ways, to be what you wanted her to be. But Instructor HFY never gave her a fair chance. He used her as an example of human primitiveness from the very first day. That is irrelevant, Korthek interjected. Personal feelings do not justify violence. They do where we come from, Jake shot back. On human worlds, if someone hurts you and enjoys it, you make sure they can't do it again. That's not primitive, that's survival. Dean Morthak called for order, as discussions broke out throughout the chamber. Lisa watched the faces around her, trying to gauge how her defense was being received. Some aliens looked thoughtful. Others seemed disturbed by the human perspective on violence. I would like to hear from the defendant herself, announced the lead board member. Lisa Carter, do you regret your actions? Lisa stood up, her heart pounding. This was the moment that would determine her future. I regret that it came to violence, she said clearly. I regret that Instructor HFY was injured. But I don't regret defending myself when he chose to humiliate me for his own satisfaction. Do you believe your response was proportionate? Asked another board member. Lisa thought carefully before answering. By your standards, probably not. By human standards, absolutely. He broke my nose and stood over me talking about how superior he was. Where I come from, that demands a response. Even if that response causes permanent injury? I could have killed him, Lisa said quietly. I was trained to kill from the time I was 8 years old. But I didn't. I broke his arm because that was enough to stop him. That shows control, not savagery. The chamber fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. Here was a 17-year-old human admitting that she could have killed a trained instructor, but chose not to. You claim you showed restraint, Korthek said, but you still chose violence over civilized resolution. What civilized resolution? Lisa demanded. Report him to authorities who think humans are primitive anyway? File a complaint that would be dismissed as deathworlder sensitivity? He hurt me, humiliated me, and enjoyed doing it. The only thing he understood was force. Ambassador I. Wells placed a hand on Lisa's shoulder. The fundamental issue here is not whether Lisa Carter committed assault. It is whether the galactic community is prepared to accept that different species have different concepts of acceptable behavior. Are you suggesting that humans should be exempt from civilized law? Asked the Veltaran board member. I'm suggesting that civilized law should account for cultural differences, Wells replied. Lisa Carter acted according to human values when faced with behavior that humans consider unacceptable. If you want humans to participate in galactic society, you must understand what that means. 6 months had passed since the hearing that changed everything at Nexus Academy. Lisa stood in Training Hall Beta, watching a mixed group of students practice techniques that would have been unimaginable when she first arrived. A Kethmaran was learning how to throw proper punches while a Veltaran worked on understanding pressure points. The board's decision had surprised everyone, including Lisa herself. Rather than punishment or expulsion, they had mandated a complete review of the Academy's teaching methods and created an entirely new department, Cross-Species Combat Studies. Lisa found herself as the department's first student instructor, a position that came with both privileges and responsibilities she had never expected. "Remember, the goal isn't to hurt your partner," Lisa called out to the practicing students. "It's to understand how different body types require different approaches. Vel, your crystalline structure means you need to focus on leverage rather than impact strikes." The young Velteran nodded, adjusting his stance. When Lisa had first suggested that each species needed to adapt human techniques to their own physiology, many instructors had been skeptical. But the results spoke for themselves. Students were learning to fight more effectively than ever before. "Lisa," called a familiar voice. She turned to see HFY approaching, his regenerated arm moving stiffly but functional. The relationship between Lisa and her former instructor had been complicated over the past 6 months. The Academy Board had required HFY to undergo extensive training on cultural sensitivity and teaching methods. He had also been assigned to work closely with Lisa in developing the new curriculum. At first, both of them had dreaded the arrangement. "The new students have arrived," HFY said. "Dean Morthak wants you to meet them before orientation begins." Lisa nodded and dismissed the practice session. As the students filed out, chattering excitedly in multiple languages, she reflected on how much had changed. These weren't the carefully polite conversations she remembered from her early days. These students were genuinely excited about learning from each other. The walk to the reception area took them through corridors that felt different now. The academy was still beautiful and alien, but it no longer felt hostile. Students from dozens of species nodded respectfully as Lisa passed, and several stopped to ask questions about upcoming classes. "I still don't understand how you do it," HFY said as they walked. "Do what?" "Make it look so simple. Yesterday I watched you teach a Meridian how to apply joint locks underwater. The mathematics alone should be impossible, but somehow you made it work." Lisa smiled. This was progress. 6 months ago, HFY would never have admitted that human techniques had value. "It's not about the mathematics, it's about understanding what works and adapting it to what's possible." They reached the reception area where a group of new students waited nervously. Lisa recognized the mix of excitement and fear in their faces. She had worn the same expression when she first arrived, but this group was different from her original class. Along with the usual species represented at the Academy, there were 3 more humans, 2 beings from other deathworlds, and what looked like a delegation from a warrior culture that had previously been considered too aggressive for the Academy. Dean Morthak approached them, his ancient features showing something that might have been pride. "Miss Carter, I'd like you to meet this semester's new students. As you can see, our recruiting has become more diverse." Lisa stepped forward and looked at the nervous faces watching her. "Welcome to Nexus Academy," she said. 6 months ago, I stood where you're standing now, convinced that I didn't belong here. I was wrong, not because I needed to change, but because this place needed to learn what I could teach." One of the new humans, a young man who looked like he came from a mining colony, raised his hand. "Is it true that you broke an instructor's arm in your first month?" Lisa heard several gasps from the alien students, and HFY shifted uncomfortably beside her. The story had become somewhat legendary, though the details changed with each telling. "I did," Lisa said simply. "But that's not the lesson you should take from it. The lesson is that sometimes conflict forces understanding that wouldn't happen any other way." She gestured to HFY. "Instructor HFY and I had a serious disagreement about the value of different fighting styles. We resolved it in a way that was traumatic for both of us. But from that conflict came something better than either of us could have achieved alone." HFY stepped forward, his crystalline features shifting in what Lisa had learned was embarrassment. "I owe these students an apology," he said. "When Lisa Carter first arrived, I saw only what I expected to see. A primitive being from a violent world who needed to be civilized. I was wrong." The new students listened intently as HFY continued. "What I failed to understand was that her techniques weren't primitive. They were adapted, her world created, fighting methods that were perfectly suited to the threats she faced. My mistake was assuming that different meant inferior. One of the Kethmoran students spoke up. But her methods are so violent. So is her world, HFY replied. Violence isn't inherently good or evil. It's a tool. The question is whether it's used appropriately. Miss Carter taught me that sometimes the most humane response to aggression is overwhelming force that ends the conflict quickly. Lisa nodded. That's what we teach here now. Not that violence is good or bad, but how to understand when and how different approaches are appropriate. A Kethmoran's flowing techniques are perfect for de-escalating conflicts between civilized beings. A human's direct methods are essential when facing genuine threats to survival. The orientation continued with Dean Morthak explaining the Academy's new philosophy. Instead of trying to make all students fit the same mold, they now celebrated the diversity of approaches that different species brought to problem-solving. Later that evening, Lisa found herself in the memorial garden that honored Academy instructors throughout history. Jake found her there, as she had hoped he would. Her old friend had thrived at the Academy, and his engineering innovations were already being implemented on multiple worlds. Thinking about home? Jake asked, sitting beside her on the curved bench. Thinking about change, Lisa replied. When we first got here, I thought I had to choose between being human and being accepted. Turns out I was asking the wrong question. What was the right question? Lisa smiled. How do I help others understand what being human means? Not so they can fix us, but so they can learn from us. Jake nodded. Your parents would be proud. The engineering principles I learned here are already making life safer on the frontier colonies. And the combat techniques you've developed are being taught on a dozen worlds. It's not just my techniques anymore, Lisa said. That's what makes it work. I took human fighting and showed it to aliens who adapted it to their own needs. Then, they showed me things I never would have discovered on my own. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the artificial stars that provided light for the garden. In the distance, Lisa could see lights from the training halls where students were, still practicing. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't broken HFY's arm? Jake asked. Lisa considered this. I think I would have been quietly transferred back to Earth after failing to adapt. The Academy would have written a report about how Deathworlders weren't suitable for higher education, and nothing would have changed. So you're glad it happened? I'm glad for what came after, Lisa said carefully. The moment itself was terrible for everyone involved. But it forced conversations. That needed to happen. As if summoned by their discussion, HFY appeared on the path leading to the garden. He approached slowly, clearly uncertain about interrupting. I hope I'm not intruding, the Veltaran said. I wanted to thank you both for your work on tomorrow's demonstration. Tomorrow marked the 6-month anniversary of the incident, and the Academy was hosting a formal presentation of the new cross-species combat studies program. Representatives from across the galaxy would attend, and Lisa was nervous about speaking to such a large audience. Are you ready for the presentation? HFY asked. As ready as I can be, Lisa replied. Though I never imagined I'd be teaching alien diplomats about the philosophy of human fighting. HFY's crystalline features shifted in what Lisa had learned was amusement. 6 months ago, I never imagined I would be learning from a human student. Perhaps that's the most important lesson of all. What's that? That assumptions are dangerous, no matter which species makes them. I assumed humans were primitive. You assumed we would never accept your methods. We were both wrong. Jake stood up and stretched. I should get back to my lab. The new quantum regulators won't design themselves. After Jake left, Lisa and HFY walked back toward the main academy complex. The corridors were quiet now, with most students in their quarters preparing for the next day. I have a confession, HFY said as they reached the intersection, where their paths diverged. When you first arrived, I requested that you be assigned to my classes specifically. Lisa stopped walking. Why? Because I wanted to prove that deathworlders couldn't be civilized. I thought having a human student fail publicly would demonstrate the superiority of our methods.